A few months ago, I did a part 1 of a Next.js and FaunaDB crash course, and lots of people were really interested and have been asking, how do we add authentication to this project? Well, that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to take Next.js, FaunaDB, all the other tools we're using, and then add on Auth0 to add authentication in this application. All right, so welcome to this part 2 Next.js crash course with a whole list of cool technologies. FaunaDB, we're using it for our database. SWR, we've been using for our querying, our fetching of data. React hook form for forms, Tailwind CSS for styling, and what we're doing in this video, most importantly, is adding authentication with Auth0. Because what we have so far is basically just a demo application of being able to do CRUD operations, storing code snippets inside of Fauna. But that's not very realistic. We want to take this to the next level. We want to make sure that we protect our data. I can have a list of my personal snippets that get saved in Fauna. And with my snippets, I don't want you or anyone else to be able to edit or delete my snippets because those things belong to me. So we'll look at protecting individual routes in our Next.js application. We'll look at doing authorization, making sure that only the right people can edit and or delete information. We'll look at front-end user hooks. We'll look at protecting things on the back end, our APIs and our pages. Really lots of cool stuff. So I think probably what we'll do is go ahead and get started. Just in case if you missed part 1, make sure to check out that video up there. Also on the screen now, you can see the Next.js crash course, Fauna, Auth0, SWR, React hook, Tailwind, the GitHub repository. So you can find all the code here. It has a branch that I'm going to start with, which is the part 2 starter. So the part 1 starter was to start you off with part 1. Part 2 starters where part 1 ended and what you'll do to now build out the authentication into this application. This is what the final demo is going to look like. So let's go ahead and let's run this thing to show what it looks like as is. And I'll need to go ahead first and make sure, and you will too, make sure that you have all of the packages installed. So after you check out the part 2 starter branch, run an npm install. Once we get that up and running, we'll be able to see this. Now, the other thing you'll need to do is add an env file for your environment variable. So you'll need a Fauna secret or a token from Fauna. So if you go back to part 1, you sign up for Fauna and you grab that token and throw it inside of your env.local file. So you can make a copy of this example file and throw that in. And those instructions are in the GitHub repository as well. And I have copied in my example of .env.local. So I have my token in there. And with that in place, now I can run an npm run dev, and this will get this thing up and started, and we'll see what we have. It looks like it already is. So let's go to localhost 3000, and we'll just kind of see. Then we'll start hacking this thing away to add authentication. All right, so this is up and running. You can see we have a couple of different snippets in here. You have the ability to show the code, to copy the code. You can edit these. So we have the ability to edit there. But the thing to know is that anyone right now can go ahead and edit these, and we don't want that. We want these to be tied to a user. So what we're going to use is the Next.js Auth0 library. And this is a pretty cool library because it just went official 1.0. And let me tell you, it's going to take care of a lot of stuff for us. It's really, really great. Now, the thing you do need to know, though, is this library only works with version 10 or higher of Next.js. So to be able to update our project, we'll need to do an npm install of Next, and then we'll make sure to grab 10.0.7, I think is what the latest is. And you can do kind of any version above 10 whenever you're doing this. So I'm going to let this run. Then we'll restart the application, just make sure it works. Then we'll get into adding everything in Auth0. All right, looks like that's running. Let's do npm run dev just to make sure this thing is still running appropriately. And then we will get into the Auth0 parts. Let's do a refresh just to make sure. All right, so there's our edit page. We can cancel and go back to the home page. Cool, that works. So what we're going to need to do is go into Auth0, and you'll need to sign up for a free account. There's a link below to sign up for your free account. There's also a link below to sign up for your Fauna account if you don't have that already. And just to show you what you'll need a collection in here. I've called mine snippets, but a collection here called code snippets, or a database called code snippets with a collection called snippets. So there's all of my data in Fauna. So you have a link below to sign up for free accounts for both Auth0 and Fauna. Great combination to build some cool applications. And then once I log in here, let's just log in with my personal Gmail account. You will need to create a new application. So if you're logging in for the first time, you might have to give a name to your tenant. Name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter a whole lot what you call it. But once you get into, if you have other tenants, once you get into the tenant that you want to work with, and this is just basically a group of applications, you'll come over to the Applications tab. You will create another application, and it looks like I've hit a limit. So I need to actually delete one of these because I've got too many. So let's do. I'm going to switch over to another tenant here and then create one in there since I've already hit the limit with all the demos and things I do. So now go into the Applications tab. Now we create an application. This thing is going to be Next.js Crash Course Part 2. Doesn't matter a whole lot what you call it here. And this will need to be a regular web application because we're going to do things in our backend serverless functions inside of Next.js to handle authentication. And when I say we, really the thing is going to do it for us. So a couple of things that you will need your domain, your client ID, and your client secret. So if we come back into the env local example, we're going to update this. Let me go ahead and grab the updated version of this so you can see what you're going to have with a few extra properties. So you'll need an Auth0 secret. You need the base URL. You'll need the issuer base URL, the client ID, and the client secret. So a couple of these things you can find inside of the documentation here for this library. So if we scroll on down, we'll need to update the callback URLs here in a second. But inside of our application, the Auth0 secret here, this is just a long random secret. So we can kind of make this whatever we want. The Auth0 base URL in this case is going to be our localhost 3000 because we're running locally. And then the issuer URL is going to be HTTPS and then our domain. So the domain is basically the tenant that you're working in. And if you come back to Auth0, you can see your domain here. So mine is JamesQQuakeDemos-2. So this will be right here, .us.auth0.com. Two more things. The client ID. All right, so we'll copy in the client ID. And then lastly, the client secret. Now, this is a private credential. I'm going to show you mine just to show you how I would get this in here, but you don't want that thing to be shared with anyone. All right, so this is an example file. You will already have your Fauna secret. This is my example file. Make sure that these are actually in the .env.local file or else Next.js won't pick them up. So just kind of showing you this as an example. Those things are already set for me inside of this .local one. So the other thing we need to do is scroll down in our settings and come to the allowed callback URLs and allowed logout URLs. And if we look in the documentation for this package, it tells us, hey, the allowed callback URL for a Next.js application will be this. Notice it's /API/auth/callback. We'll come back to that in a second. And then the allowed logout URLs is localhost 3000. So the way this authentication works is we will redirect the user over to Auth0. They will handle authentication and then send the user back. So we're saying this is where we want you to send the user back to after they log in to the specific route. And then here's a domain that users are allowed to log out from and come back to. All right, so those are our settings. Make sure to scroll down and save them. And again, you can use this Next.js library here. The documentation on the GitHub is really great. And so the next thing we're going to do is basically the rest of the setup. Now, the setup in this sense is really just these environment variables. And then we create this magical API dynamic route handler, which will do several things for us. So previously, we would have had to create a login route, a callback route, a logout route, and a me route. Now this package, it's really fantastic, is going to do all of that stuff for us. So we don't have to do anything other than this little bit of code here. So we're going to go into Pages. We'll go into API, do a new folder called Auth. And then this will be a new file, .auth0, close your bracket, and then .js. Let's make sure that I got that right. So .auth0.js. That looks right. And then I will paste in that code. And again, that will do everything we need to actually facilitate authentication. So let's scroll down. The other thing we will want to have access to is we want to have access to the user in the front end. So this will allow us to give us some hooks to protect pages and routes and get an instance of the user session But additionally, inside of our app.js, we want to grab the user provider. So if I start typing in here, user provider, well, actually, the one thing we forgot to do is actually install the package. That's a big misstep on my part. So let's do that right now. Let's install the Auth0 Nextjs Auth0. Let's just make sure that's the right name. I think that is, yeah. So when we actually have this package installed, it will do all of these things for us, and it will we'll actually see some IntelliSense here to grab this user provider. So if I start typing user provider and then wrap all of this code in app with the user provider. So 2 clarifications. I had some IntelliSense here, so it did this import for me, the auto import. This is importing this provider from the package that we just installed. We then wrap this my app, the app, in that user provider, which then makes the user data, the user object, available to us in our different packages or in our different components. So with that in place, let's go and do an npm run dev. We won't really see anything that is different, but in a second, we'll add a link with a nav bar to start the login process and then dynamically be able to show login, logout buttons based on the user status using the use user hook. So we've installed the library, we've set our environment variables, we had the 1 bit of configuration, and then we're using the user provider to be able to access the user in our different pages. So let's come back to our running application. This should just look exactly the same, and it does. Cool. So the next thing we want to do is I want to add a set of links in here. So I'm going to go into components and do a nav bar. And this is going to be a functional component here. So RFC is a little snippet I have. So you can check out the React Redux snippets in VS Code extensions. Let's take a look at that really quickly. React snippets. Let's see, ES7 React Redux GraphQL. That's the one that I'm using. You can also type this out. It doesn't matter. And inside of the nav bar, we want to have several different things. So we'll have our nav, and then we'll start with a link. And this is a link that comes from, let's do an import link from next link. We'll import that link from the link package inside of Next.js. And the link, the first one is just a link to the homepage. And then inside of that, to add classes to our anchor, we'll do an anchor tag here with class name. And we're using Tailwind. This is already set up. If you want to know how that was set up, you can go back and watch part 2. But we'll have text 2XL, margin bottom 2. Make this block. We'll have text center, text red to 100. And then we'll make this thing, not whatever that was, but uppercase as well. So this will be our anchor tag, and this is everyday snippets. It's totally making that up. Cheesy, I know. But so that'll be our link to the homepage, and then we want to add the actual items inside, basically the nav items, the different links that we'll use. And we'll use a couple of cool things in here. There is a flex property in Tailwind. So this is display flex, which is going to align them horizontally. And we also want to give some space to them horizontally as well. So Tailwind has this really cool thing, space X and then -3. We'll put space in between the different items. It's pretty nice. We will justify that thing center. We'll do a margin bottom of 6, and then we'll have an M-X-auto, which will center the stuff on the screen. It will center this whole thing on the screen. And then inside of there, a couple more links, and then we'll be able to see some cool stuff. We will have a link here with an href too. And I'm going to have a few different links to /snippets /language. So HTML is the first one. Each one of these anchor tags will have a class name of text red 100. And if you're curious what I'm using here, these little shortcuts are emit syntax. So I'm doing an anchor tag with a class of text red 100. And then also a class of hover underline. I can do all of that in one shot. And then this will be HTML. And the href in this case in Next.js goes on the link, not the anchor tag. So now we just copy and paste this a couple times. We're just getting our nav bar set up here so we can have pages for these different snippets. So here's CSS. We'll do that one. And then we'll create one more of those. And this will be for JavaScript. All right, so there that is. So we have our links in here, but we also want to add a few additional links. Let's go ahead and add our nav bar into our app.js so we can see this. So Inside of here, let's add the nav bar. Again, I'm getting auto import above. I'm a little lazy. So you can see there's the import. Make sure you hit the import if you don't get auto import, and you can type it out just like it is there. All right, now if we refresh, if we haven't broken anything, let's do a check here. Let's make sure we're importing. It looks like maybe an error with our link here. I think this is probably lowercase, I think is what that is. I think that's right now. So make sure you get that import right. And then we refresh and we see our little anchor tags here for the snippets, /snippets, HTML, CSS. JavaScript, this one should go home. The HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those routes don't exist yet. So that's something we're going to add in a minute. And the other thing is now we want to add this logout button. So let's copy one more of these things. And this is going to go to /API/auth/login. And it will look like the others. So this login button now will trigger this process to go ahead and start to log in. And remember, because we added this little bit of configuration with this dynamic handler, it's taking care of the rest. So it created this route for us. So let's now come over to the application. We should be able to log in here. And it may log, I think it logged me in automatically because I logged in before. So I'll have to log out to show you this. But if you click that, it will go through the process of logging in. And by default, you will have option to log in with Gmail coming from an Auth0 application, or you could create an account with your email and password. So that's important to know. So just to kind of show how this works, let's go ahead and add the log out here. So again, this route already exists, log out. And I just realized why underline wasn't working. You probably already caught this. There's our underline issue there. All right, so those links now should be underlinable. There we go. So if we log out, this is going to basically refresh the page. You can't really tell what happens, but now watch when I log in. Since I was fully logged out, now it's asking me, hey, do you want to log in? And I say, yeah, I already have an account, so I can log in with those email password credentials. You could go to sign up and do the same thing. Log in now, and now I don't see anything different, but I actually finished the login process. So what we want to do is be able to toggle between the login and logout links based on if the user is logged in or not. And this actually becomes really, really cool to me. There is the use user hook. So make sure that this gets imported from this package. Because we used the user provider, we have access to the use user hook in here. And from there, we can grab the user and is loading property. Pretty sweet, to be perfectly honest. This is really great. So with that, we only want to show the login button if we're logged out. So we'll say, hey, we're not loading and there's not a user. Then let's show that thing. Okay. And then basically the opposite for log out. So if we're not loading and we have a user, now I'll close this thing out. So if we're not loading and we have a user, show the log out button. Now we'll see how cool this is. Hopefully, if we haven't done anything. Oh, this is loading, not just loading. Sorry. You probably saw that one too. All right. Now you see I have the log out button. If I click log out, it refreshes the page. Now log in shows. If I log in, you probably already guessed it. It will show me the log out button again. So let's just do that to show you how it works or that it works and confirm, hey, there's the log out button. I can't tell you how exciting this is that like all that stuff is taken care of from the library itself. Super cool stuff. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to add one other route in here. So if we're logged in, then I want to add one more link. And this link is going to be /my snippets. My snippets. So this is a page where I can see, hey, my snippets. And then because we've got two elements in here, we need to wrap them with some sort of parent element. So we can wrap them with this little, not invisible, but I forget the fragment tag in React. And that will give us the ability to put these two links in there. But this fragment tag doesn't become an empty div inside of our markup in the end. So there's my snippets, log out. My snippets, that page isn't defined yet. So we'll get another 401. But we've now added authentication to our application. We have the ability to let users log in and log out, which is pretty sweet, and then be able to display conditionally different information based on that status. All right, one additional thing I wanted to do is if we look inside of the index.js, right now it shows a title, a subtitle, has a link to create snippets, but I only want to show the link to create a snippet if they are logged in. And then alternatively, if they're not logged in, I want to have a login or a message that says login to be able to do stuff basically. So I want to create that as a reusable component. So let's create one more here, the header.js file. This will be another functional component. And even though the snippet adds the import for React and Next.js, we technically don't need it. We are going to use the use user hook from our package. So from the Auth0 Nextjs Auth0, again, just typing that out. You could get the auto import if it works for you too. We will also need the link again. So we'll need link from next link like that. Cool. And then we'll use our same thing we just did before, user and is loading from the use user hook. Now, again, the beauty of these hooks is they can be used in any component. We don't have to pass around props and callbacks and stuff like that. We can use it right here. It's really cool stuff. And this is really modern, nice React here. All right, so this is going to be a header tag with a class name of margin Y of 12. So we want to give a lot of breathing room around this thing. And then we'll have a title property, so an H1, and this will be text red 100, text 2XL, and this will take in or display the title property that will be up here, and we will destructure this from our props. So if you're not sure what that means, usually there are props passed in here, and you could call props.title. In addition, you could do a little shorthand and go ahead and destructure the title property from props. And then additionally, we will need a subtitle property here too. Now, not every page in here is going to have a subtitle property. So I am going to say if subtitle, so subtitle and then if there is a subtitle, we will just add a paragraph tag there with a class name of text red 200. And then this will display the subtitle. So that way, if someone decides they don't want, or if we have a page that doesn't need to display a subtitle, and we can do it like this here. Works out well. All right, so then what we want to do is conditionally display this button up here. So we only want to add, I'm going to just rip this out of here and put it into here. We only want to display that button if the user is logged in. So our little trick that we did before, if not is loading and we have a user, then we will display this link. And then I'm just going to kind of copy and paste this again and say, well, if we are not loading and we don't have a user, then we will go /API/auth/login, that same route, and then say login to create snippets. Works for me. So let's go back and see how this works. We created the header, but now we need to use it. So let's go inside of here. We'll grab our header component. We will pass a title of air day code snippets, and then we'll do a subtitle of create and browse snippets use every day in web development. All right, and then we can get rid of both of these, and we should have saved ourselves a little bit of code and made that reusable. So let's check out our page now. We're logged in, so we see create a snippet. This should go to /new, which it looks like it does, log out, and then that thing should say log in. And every time I have to test this, I have to log back in, so I'll do that really quickly. All right, cool. So that looks like it's working, which is great. Now let's start to protect this new route, because right now, if I log out, again, we have to go through this like infinite amount of times. Let's protect this new route to where we can't get there if the user is not logged in, because we don't want people to create snippets if they are not logged in. So this actually becomes really cool too. Let's open up the new route. And in Next.js, with this Auth0 library, we get access to a with page auth required function from that Auth0 library. And then typically what we would do is we would export a get server side props function, something like this, export const get server side props. if we get the capitalization right there, and it would be some sort of function. Inside that function, we could do user validation. Well, Auth0, this package is going to do all that for us. So we can call with page auth required. And this is all we need. What this is going to do is automatically, if someone tries to access this page, it's going to send them over to the login route. So let's go over and check this out. Now, I'm not logged in. If I refresh the page, it should now send me to the login page. Hey, this is good so far. Let's log in for the millionth time. We'll have to do it probably a million more, but that's okay. Let's log in here. And when we come back, now we can see the login, or excuse me, the new page. How cool is that? It's really, really cool to me. So not only do we need to protect this page, we also need to protect the create snippet route. Well, hey, there might be some extra work that goes into that. Yeah, there could be, but Auth0, again, is going to help us out here. So very similar to what we just saw, there is a with API auth required function, and then a get session function from the Auth0 library. And what we'll do is we will wrap this entire handler with this with API auth required. So it's a higher order function. It will do the validation to make sure the user is logged in, and if so, it will then call this function. So with API auth required, we'll wrap this entire thing. So that means come all the way down to the bottom and do that. So close that with the closing parentheses. And then we will get the session from get session. All right. And to that, we'll need to pass in the request and response. So from here now, once we have the session, we're getting this session so that we can get the user ID property, which comes from the session.user.sub property. Now the sub property on a user is kind of defined in the authentication spec. And the sub property is basically what we would refer to as a user ID. It's the unique identifier for that user. And that's what we're now going to take and attach to our snippet as we create it. So we'll pass in the user ID. So we're calling this create snippet function. We're passing all these things as well as the user ID, but that function needs to be updated. So let's go look in our Fauna utils, look at create snippet, pass in the user ID, and then attach that to this object. So as we're kind of testing this stuff out here, I'm going to go into Fauna and I'm going to delete all of these records just to show that we're starting fresh and that this stuff is working. So delete, and delete. All right, cool. There we go. Now let's go ahead and create a snippet. So let's say new snippet. Let's make sure we refresh this page, get the latest code. We'll do a console log. Hey, how many times a day do you write that? We'll do language of JavaScript. We will do a snippet of console log hello world. All right. And then, actually, sorry, that one should go down in the actual code. And then this should log hello world. And what we want to see here is one, that the save still works, which it looks like it did. And if we go into edit, we should be able to see that information. And if we look inside of Fauna for this document, you should be able to see inside of data that there is a user ID property. So we're able to associate a given item as we create it with a certain user or the user that created it, which is the sub property that comes from Auth0. Now, if you're curious, the sub property from Auth0 is a combination of the platform that they logged in with, pipe, and then an ID of some sort. So this is what this is here. I logged in with the Auth0 database login, and then it has an ID for the user. So if you log in with Twitter and Facebook and Google and that kind of stuff, you'll see that prefix in here as well. All right, so as we're able to create these new items, now we need to do a similar thing for updating a snippet. So we will go to the edit page, and let's pull that up here. We want to make sure if we try to get to the edit page that we are logged in. So what we could do is use the same, let's see, go back to our new page. We could use the same hook here with page auth required. We could use that in here. Let's see if I can get with page auth required. This is going to do the auto import up here. So there's the import, so I don't have to type it in again. And actually, I guess that auto import is not good because that shouldn't come from there. It should come from here. So maybe be careful with the auto imports. I got a little ahead of myself. And what the with page auth required does, like we just saw, is it can return the function itself. So if we did, let's just move that away. We could do this, call that function. Let's just make sure export async function, export const. So let's convert this a little bit. So we're saying server-side props is what this thing returns. Well, we still need to do a little bit of custom logic ourselves. And if we want to, inside of the documentation, we can still use that hook from Auth0, but we can also, let's do a search for server-side props. See where this with page auth required. Let's go to that documentation. Scroll down a little bit, and you can override. You can still add the get server-side props override if you want to. So this thing takes a configuration object, and if we call this, let's see, async get server side props, then we can have that just be the function that we defined here. So let's copy and paste this and do it like this. Let's see if that looks right. It looks like it is. So what this is going to say is it's going to require the page to be authenticated, and then we're going to grab the item that we're looking for based on that ID, so we can edit it and then pass that to our page. So let's see now if we come back over and load up our application. First of all, we want to make sure that we can still edit this thing. So this should still work. Cool. Now let's copy this URL and let's log out. And then we will paste this URL back in and try to navigate there. It should send us to the login form. So we've protected that route as well. So we've been through this a couple times, but we're able to protect that edit route to make sure that only the right people can get there. Pretty cool. So just with that little bit, that little hook here, or the higher order function with page auth required, we are able to do this. And then we can also override some additional pieces of functionality. So that said, not only do we want the authentication on the page, we also want it on the route, because what happens is someone could send a request from Postman or something like that to our backend, and we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves there as well. So inside of our update snippet, we will do similar to what we did before. Let's actually look at our create snippet, and conveniently you can kind of copy these few lines of code. You'll see what this turns out to be here in a second. But I want to make sure that I wrap the entire function for update snippet with this with API auth required. Scroll down, make sure we get this closing parentheses. And then now this page is requiring auth. So if we sent a post request directly to this endpoint, it will be protected. It won't let someone log in unless they already have, or excuse me, it won't let someone update a snippet if they don't already have a session. So Auth0 is taking care of all that stuff for us. So by just doing this, that thing is basically done. Now we can do the same logic, and again, going to copy a few lines here. Same logic inside of our delete. So I'm going to do this thing here and say, hey, if you want to delete something, you also have to be authenticated. Looks like we've got some additional console logs out here that we maybe don't need as well. So now that we have those two things protected, we have to think about one additional layer of security. We're protecting the endpoint to make sure that the user is logged in as they try to create and delete things. But we also want to make sure that they are the owner of that record, which is pretty important. And that means to make sure that the record that they're trying to update match or is owned by that user, we have to go and get that record out of the database based on the record ID, then compare the user ID from the session with the user ID of the thing that is in the database. So what this is going to look like, and this will be the exact same for the update and delete, is from, let's go, let me make sure I get my correct sample up here in the delete. So from this ID, we want to now get the existing record, and we'll call get snippet by ID from Fauna, pass in the ID. I think this gave me, yeah, so it auto imported. So we have delete snippet and get snippet by ID. We want to get that thing. Now we want to check if there is no, let's go down to a new line. If there is no existing record, or the existing record .data .user ID. Remember, if we go back into Fauna, that is where this user ID property. So if that property does not match, so does not equal the user ID property, and let's make sure that we get that appropriately. So that is from const user ID session.user.sub. So that sub property, which we put in a variable called user ID, if those things don't match, then we want to stop this now. We don't want to let that happen. And what we can do is we can say the res.status code is 404. Just say it's not found, and then return res.json, a little message here that says record not found. That way, we're not giving away too much. We're not saying you don't own this record. We're being a little ambiguous to say, hey, we can't find that record. So it may not exist, or you may not be the owner. So if that passes, then we'll let the delete happen. Now, additionally, it's going to be actually the same type of thing. And one thing we didn't do is make sure that we await this. So make sure that that actually finishes before we go on to the next step. But this logic will be the same inside of the update as well. So after we get the ID here, we can do the same check, and we'll do the same thing up here. User ID is session.user.sub property. So we'll make sure that you are the user, you are a logged in user, and you're the owner of this particular record with this ID to be able to update and or delete, which is pretty good. So we can come back to our application. I am the owner of this, so I should be able to hello world with an exclamation. I should be able to save this, hopefully. If we go and show the code, this says hello world. Does that do... Looks like that might have not saved. Let's take a look and see what happened in here. Let's try to update this again. Let's do a save. Did anything happen? So update snippet failed. Looks like we might have something going on here. Let's take a look in the server. All right, get snippet by ID is not defined. Well, inside of here, we did not define it. We did not import it. So get snippet by ID. So always want to make sure that you double check, triple check your imports, especially if you're copying in code. So now let's go to delete. Let's go to hello world, add an exclamation, save it. That thing should be okay. If we show the code, we see the exclamation. Now we should also be able to delete it. That thing didn't work. So let's go and double check that. Looks like, let's look inside of delete snippet. Did we close this thing out? Nope. So once we wrap it with this with API auth required, you have to then close out that closing parentheses. Always something. So now let's refresh again. Let us come to delete, and now that thing should be gone. Hey, it worked. That's pretty cool. We can still create another snippet. Let's do console log. This is going to be JavaScript. Then it will be, this is a console log. All right, and then we'll have the code of console log hello world. All right, let's save it. And then that thing is still there. So those things are working, but delete and update routes are protected from making sure that the user is authenticated, and then also making sure that, that the user is the owner of that record. So the next thing we'll want to do is make sure that we're only showing these, the edit button. Actually, we'll move delete into the edit screen. But we only want to show the edit button if the user is the owner of that record on the front end. So we'll add a check to make sure that we only conditionally show the edit button. All right, so we'll need to take a look at our snippet component. So let's look for snippet in here. We're going to move this delete into the edit page. So we'll come back to that in a second. Not actually using the router here, so we can get rid of that completely. And what we want to do is scroll down to where we show the edit button and remove the delete button. So we'll remove that because we want to put that in the edit screen. And then also now be able to protect this link to make sure, this edit link. So we only allow people to edit stuff that they own. So to do this, we need to get access to the user information. So we'll grab this from user and then use our use user hook. And does that give a good import in here? It looks like it did, yeah. So this is the cool thing again with this hook is now we have access to the user and we can now go down and do a check. So is there a user? First of all, it's going to be the first thing. And then does the user have a sub property? And just like we just did in our backend routes, we want to check, does the user, or excuse me, the user will have a sub property. So now we're just comparing, is the user sub property equal to the snippet.data.id? So we're making sure, user ID. So we're making sure that we only show the edit button for records that this user owns. So let's save this really quickly. Let's come back. We removed the delete button. We still see the edit button. That's good. Now to be able to test this out, to show the difference in this, you will need to do the same type of thing. So log out, log back in. You can log in. You can create another email account, or you can log in with your Gmail if you want to. So I will do that here. Let's log in with Gmail there. And come back and see now I don't have an edit button. Now, if I do this, let's see CSS center, CSS flex center. Let's do that. So inside of this will be CSS. Description will be center something with flex box. So we'll do a class of center. We'll have a display of flex. We'll say justify content center. And then we'll have align items center. So a little trick there for anybody that's interested. We'll close this out and remove this one. So now let's save this. That should still save appropriately. And we see the edit button for this one, which is great. So now we're able to edit this one because I own it. I can save and or cancel. Now, the other thing we need to do is we're going to move this delete functionality. Let's move that into the actual form itself. So let's take that delete. We'll save this one. Let's go into the form. We already have create. We already have update. Now let's paste in delete. So there's our delete. Let's see. That should be the exact same. And then what we want to do is we want to scroll down a little bit. And if you look at the on submit for this is calling the handle submit function, which comes back from this form. And that will be triggered. This is a little bit of HTML knowledge for you. That will be triggered now from any of the buttons that we have down here. So if we look inside of our buttons, we have the save, cancel, and then let's copy and paste this one for delete. And oh, actually, we copied the wrong one. We shouldn't copy that one. We should copy the actual button up here. So let's copy the button, not the link. And this will be delete. It'll have all those same properties, but we don't want this to be a type of submit, because what that will mean is if we press enter, if we're in one of these boxes and we press enter, it will trigger the form submission, but we're not actually looking to have this be the default form submission. We want this to call, so on click, we want this to call the delete snippet. Yeah, the one that we just created. So we'll call that delete snippet function, and this won't be triggered by regular form submission. So otherwise, if this was an input, it would trigger as well as basically the save here, and you'd get some weird interactions. Trust me, because I had to debug this for a while. Let's save this. Let's see, does this delete button? Yeah, I think we're missing the margin right on this one. So MR2, I think. And we could also group these and put a space X like we did before, but this will work. So there's our delete, and this should make a call to delete up here. Scroll all the way up. The other thing we want to do though is after we do the delete, now we want to navigate to the index route and not call snippet delete, because we don't have that function. We don't need it anymore because we're calling it right here. So I think we should be good. Let me copy this information. Let's delete this thing. It should go back here. Notice that it took a second, but it did refresh the information here with use SWR to now show the new information, which is great. Show that thing was deleted. So let's do another one. Let's say this is center horizontal or center flex CSS. Language is going to be CSS. The description center stuff with flex box. Paste in that snippet. Save this thing. That should create that new record. Here it is. We could go into edit. We could add an exclamation. We could save it. There's the exclamation. We could edit it again and cancel and go back to the homepage. So that stuff is working out really well. It's pretty cool stuff. Now, the other thing that we talked about doing is adding this My Snippets route. So that one will be fun, and we'll need to do a route and a page for that. So it'll be a good combination of stuff there. So let's start to create this. Let's create a new page. So in pages, we'll have a My Snippets JS. We'll do our functional component. We don't actually need this import up here. And then we'll make sure that this is capitalized for My Snippets. So what we want to do in here is we want to have similar to the other stuff we've done before. Let's actually go back to the index page because it's going to look similar to that. Let's copy in the head information. So here is head. Let's make sure we get that import from next head. And then we also, again, we have this information here. We kind of just want to copy all of this. It's going to be basically the same. Let's paste it in. Let's see what we're missing. We need our header. All right, so there's the header. The topic or the title, excuse me, of this will be My Snippets. We don't actually need a subtitle, I don't think, so we can skip that and it'll work just fine. And then now if there is a snippets property, we'll go ahead and display them. And obviously we don't have any yet. So we can do a few things, we can have a few different options of how our snippets work, but the use SWR stuff has been working really well. So I think we can actually just use that. So let's call in the use SWR hook. We'll call that and say, hey, we want this to make a request to API/my snippets. All right. And then from there, we'll get the data. If I could type correct. Nope, I can't type. Data. We'll rename or alias that thing to snippets. Then we'll have, I guess actually that's kind of it there. And use our use SWR. So this will take care of making the query to this endpoint, grabbing the information, and now we can display it. But you probably are realizing that we don't actually have the API endpoint for this yet. And another thing that we haven't done is we need to make sure that the user is logged in. So we can go through this process again of export const get server side props equals, and then call the with page auth required. So I got the auto import up here. So really quickly, now that we have a few pieces already together or already templatized, we've got a couple of components in here to help us display information. We've got the hook from Auth0 to be able to require that this page, that the user be authenticated before they get there. That stuff is together. Now we need to create the actual API endpoint in here. So let's go into API, a new one for My Snippets. All right, My Snippets in here. We're going to need to do a couple of things. So right now inside of Fauna, we don't have a get snippets by user. So we have a get snippet by ID and we have a get snippets, but not one by user. So what you will need to do, I've already got this created, but if I look inside of snippets and then my indexes or inside of this database, there is a snippets by user. Now let's look at these settings and we'll name this thing snippets by user. I'm going to delete this and we can create it together. And it's going to base its information on the data.userID property. So let's delete this just so I can show you that we're starting from scratch. Let's create a new index. This is going to be this name. The data is, or excuse me, the terms, what it's looking at is data.userID. And then the rest of the information can stay the same. So if we don't need more information there, but start a collection, snippets collection in this case. Go ahead and save this. Value is cache. Please wait at least 60 seconds after creating or renaming an index before reusing its name. Okay, so just making sure this is, I think this is good. Or maybe it won't let me use the index because I just deleted one, maybe is what it was. Okay, maybe I can do this, rename this to 2. I think that was my problem. So because I'd already had an index with that name, then it was doing other stuff. So I'll just make sure that in this case, I use the snippets by user 2. In the source code, you'll probably find snippets by user because that's the index that you'll create yourself. All right, still building. So this could take a few minutes. That's fine. Well, let's go ahead and work on the code in here inside of Fauna to get snippets by user. So let's do that. Let's create a new function in here, const get snippets by user. So this is an async function. Take in a user ID. And we've done some of this Fauna stuff before, so some of it will be pretty familiar, but we are now going to specifically use the index in our query. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to destructure the data property from what we get back. We'll call the Fauna client. We will call query. All right, so we want to run a query in Fauna. For each piece of information, we want to call, wow, this is not working at all, q.map. So we're going to map through each one. What information are we going to get to map through? Well, we want to paginate everything that matches. And this gets, it's a little tough, to be honest, from my perspective, but we'll get there. We want to match everything with the index, and then that will be snippets by user 2. Remember, I just updated that, but yours will probably just be not 2. We'll pass in the user ID. That's the thing that it's going to look to match inside of this index. So that property that we set where it's looking to compare against the user ID, that's where we pass in that parameter. And then after that, we will have as we map, what is the thing that we want to do with each one? So we're going to call lambda. We'll get a reference to its ref, or we'll call it ref. And then we'll call q.get, q.var, and pass in that ref. All right, let me save this. And this is some tricky stuff syntactically, so let me make sure it looks good. So we're going to make a query. With that query, we're going to map over. What are we going to map over? Well, we're going to map over the things that we paginated with, which is a match of the index snippets by user 2. That's what that is. So let's give ourselves a little bit more room here. By passing in the user ID that we're looking for, we'll have our comma. Then for each one of these records, what do we do? Well, we get a reference to it as ref. Then we say, hey, we want to basically go and get that thing from that reference is basically what we're doing. And then got a little bit of formatting in here. Have we used this before? I think we have. I think this is what we can do. So let's just copy this in. We could also create a snippet or create a function to minimize this stuff for us, but we'll do it for now. So we'll take each one of those returned objects and we'll get rid of the ref and then we'll just attach the ID. So that's what we'll do. And then we want to export this function all the way at the bottom. And then inside of My Snippets now, we will import that thing. This is My Snippets, the API. So we'll import get snippets by user from, and then ... utils Fauna. All right, so we get that thing. And then we'll import a couple more things from Auth0. So with API auth required, we want to protect this endpoint. And then we'll also have get session from Auth0. All right, and then we'll do our export default with API auth required. Inside of it will be the async function handler that takes in the request response. All right, and then, yeah, I think that will work. We will grab the session from actually, I don't, oh yeah, we do need it. Okay, so we'll grab the session from get session. All right, so that is from this thing up here. We'll grab the user session. We'll grab the user ID, which is session.user.sub property. And by the way, we know there is a user on the session because of this thing here. So this will guarantee us that the user is there. Then we can do a little bit of validation here. If the rec.method does not equal get, then we will return res.status of 405, I think is a bad request. And then lastly, let's try to get these snippets from get snippets by user, passing in that user ID. And then we'll return back with that. So res.status 200.json of snippets. All right. And then in case something goes wrong, we'll catch the exception or the error, and we will log out the error. And then also res.status send back a 500 with JSON and say message something went wrong. I don't know what it is. Went wrong. All right, how's that looking? All right, so with API auth required, we're protecting this endpoint. It will be /API/my snippets, which is called in here. So that should work out. We will grab the information in Fauna with this function that we just created. So let's look at the Fauna again. So get snippets by user, takes in a user ID, makes the query based on that index that we just created. And then you can see format the snippets a little bit, and then they're good to go. Let's take a look to see if this is going to work. Let's come back here. Let's click on My Snippets and let's just see what happens. We go to the My Snippets page, and of course something breaks. So let's go and take a look. This is just part of the process here. And after a few minutes of looking around and debugging, this import with page auth required. Need to make sure I double check this stuff is importing from the wrong place. So that should import from just the actual package there. Let's give this a save. Hopefully it will refresh if we come, and this is here my looking up what was going wrong. So eventually I got to the solution of just having the wrong import. And hopefully now I can see my snippet. So the page is loading, that's good. Looks like something is going wrong in the API call. So let's take a look at that. Can I read property headers of undefined? And I think what is going on is it's looking for the request and the response object. Again, these small things will catch up with you, so make sure that you are more careful with your code than I am. So let's see if we give it another shot now. Refresh on this page. We'll see if we get back some snippets. The actual snippet component is not defined. This is just how it is. So let's make sure this thing is imported. I'm trusting my auto import. There we go. Let's save. Let's do a refresh to see if we get some snippets this time. Let's refresh this page. Please give me snippets. Mutate is not defined. We don't need the snippet deleted. So we don't need the mutate because we moved that elsewhere. Please now let us find some snippets. There we go. It works. So if I am center flex CSS, this is my snippet here. I can log out. I think that was with my Google account. So now let me log back in, and now let me log in. It'll still be a Google email, but it will be with a username password in Auth0. So let's log in with that. Now let's see if we go back to snippets, we should get a different snippet inside of here. It should still work. Then we have the console log. Pretty sweet stuff. So we're able, this has been a longer tutorial, but we did a decent amount of stuff, but primarily we're able to add authentication and security to our applications in a very powerful way. So there are a few features I was wanting to add in this. I think what I'll do is do a part 3 video where we will break out these separate pages for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, add another index in FaunaDB to query by language. We'll add all of those, and then maybe we'll do deploying of this application. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. All right, so we've got a few more features that we could add if you're curious. But we accomplished a ton of stuff using Auth0 for authentication, covering authentication, authorization, checking ownership of records, protecting API endpoints, protecting pages, all the coolest stuff. Cool for me. I'm a nerd. Yeah. But let me know what other features you would like to see covered in a part 3. And if you would like to see a part 3, let me know in the comments below, and I'll come back and we can add more features and make this even better and better. Anyways, thanks for checking it out, and I'll catch you next time.